"You are the man in my mother's photo," said the girl with brown eyes, extending a yellowish photograph to Richard Wellington III while he was waiting for his Bentley on the exclusive country club of Manhattan. The 52-year-old billionaire, heir to a $3 billion real estate empire, stopped abruptly. The girl appeared to be about 12 years old, with an accent that denounced her Latin origin. Beside her, a woman of about 35 years nervously held a cleaning bag. "Sorry, Mr. Wellington," murmured the woman in broken English. "Carmen, let's go. We shouldn't bother." But Richard had already taken the picture. Her fingers trembled imperceptibly by recognizing the 22-year-old smiling next to a beautiful young brunette in front of a small house in Mexico. It was himself exactly 25 years ago. "Where did you get it?" he asked, his voice losing all the characteristic arrogance. "My mother kept before she died," Carmen replied with the typical courage of those who have nothing more to lose. "She said you promised to go back to us." Richard Wellington III never imagined that his rebel past would return to haunt him this way. Maria Elena Rodriguez, the love of his rebellious youth when he spent 3 months in Mexico challenging his controlling father, the woman he abandoned when he found to be pregnant, choosing the family fortune instead of true love. "Carmen is her daughter," said the older woman, who Richard now realized that she was the girl's grandmother. "Maria Elena died last year. Cancer. There was no money for treatment." Those words hit Richard as a punch in the stomach. For decades, he had built an empire based on domation of poor families, especially Latin immigrants. Cruel irony of fate, had spent a lifetime expelling people just like his own daughter. Flashbacks began to form in Richard's mind as painful fragments. Maria Elena pregnant, begging on the phone, he turning off, his father threatening to disinherit him if he got involved with these people. The choice he made at 22, money instead of love, privilege instead of responsibility. "What do you want?" he asked, partially recovering the composure, but his voice betrayed nervousness. "Nothing," Carmen replied, taking the picture back with a determined movement that surprised Richard. "I just wanted you to know that your daughter exists." Richard watched those brown eyes, identical to his own eyes, identical to those of the mother he had loved and abandoned. There was his true heritage, not the skyscrapers and properties he had inherited from his father. A daughter raised in poverty, while he accumulated billions at the expense of families like hers. "Wait," said Richard, extending his hand when he saw that they were preparing to leave. I can help somehow. Money, education, anything." Carmen smiled, a smile that froze Richard's blood for his calculated coldness, so different from the innocence he expected to find in a child. "We don't want your dirty money, Mr. Wellington." The phrase echoed like a slap on the face. How did she know about the questionable methods of her business? How could a 12-year-old child have such composure before the most powerful man he had probably ever known? As her grandmother pulled Carmen away, the girl turned one last time. "Mom said you were different when you were young, who had a good heart." His break was deliberate, calculated. "She also said people like you always pay for your choices. Always." Richard remained still, holding Bentley's keys as he watched his daughter disappear in the Manhattan crowd. The man who had destroyed thousands of immigrant families had just discovered that his own soul has been killed for 25 years. But what Richard Wellington III did not know that this casual meeting had not been coincidence. Carmen had planned every word, every gesture, every moment of that confrontation, and that his daughter kept secrets that would transform that moment of remorse into something much more devastating. In Richard's mind, a question echoed. How could a 12-year-old girl talk to the accuracy of someone who knew her weaknesses perfectly? If you are enjoying this story of justice and redemption, be sure to subscribe to the channel. What would happen when a man who built his fortune destroying families found that he had destroyed his own family in the process? And most importantly, what did your daughter really know about the crimes he committed in the name of profit? Richard drove to his mansion in Hamptons as an automaton, that yellowish photograph burning in his mind like red, baked iron. For 25 years, he had managed to suffocate any memory of Maria Elena, building a wall of luxury and power to keep the past away. Now sitting in your writing private IO, the perfectly manicurated gardens of his own ownership of $50 million, each plant, each stone, every detail had been calculated to demonstrate its success. But everything seemed empty before those brown eyes identical to their own. "Mr. Wellington," his secretary Margaret interrupted his thoughts through the intercom. "The advice is waiting in the meeting room. The presentation of the downtown project is in 15 minutes. Downtown, the project that would expel 500 immigrant families from their apartments to build a luxury complex. Families just like Carmen and his grandmother. The irony was too cruel to ignore." In the meeting room, Richard watched the profit graphics designed for downtown while his mind was elsewhere. Its partners celebrated the numbers. 300% of return in 2 years, thanks to the very low rents they paid for the land before dumping the tenants. "Richard, are you okay?" Patricia Blackwood asked her partner 15 years ago. "It seems distant today." "Just thinking about the final details," lied, forcing a smile. But inside, every slide of the presentation reminded him of Carmen saying, "We don't want his dirty money." The flashback started without warning. Maria Elena at the age of 19 working on a small cafeteria in Mexico, smiling when he arrived for lunch every day. Your dream conversations about a future they would build together. The promises she made when she found she was pregnant. Promises she broke the moment she stepped on the plane back to New York. "I come back in 3 weeks. I had lied, knowing I would never come back. "I will solve everything with my father and seek you." That night Richard did something he hadn't done for decades. Searched for Maria Elena Rodriguez on Google. What found it devastated. Articles about his death. A small obituary note that mentioned his struggle against cancer and an orphaned daughter. No mention to him, but there was something more disturbing. Maria Elena had worked as a cleaning lady in several Manhattan buildings in recent years. Buildings that, according to the addresses, belonged to Wellington Enterprises. She had spent the last few years cleaning the offices of the man who had abandoned her pregnant. Richard's heart stopped. Maria Elena had worked in the same building where he made his decisions about eviction. He had cleaned the table where he signed eviction orders against families just like hers. How many times have she been through her door? How many times have you seen your name on the golden plaque? A new search on Google has revealed something even worse. Photos of employees at company events, where he was able to identify Maria Elena at the bottom of some images. She was there, uniform, invisible among other Latin workers who kept their empire working in the shadows. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Richard?" The voice was soft but calculated. "Here is Carmen Rodriguez." His blood froze. How had a 12-year-old child achieved his private number? "Carmen, how do you— I need to talk to you. Tomorrow, noon, in the park in front of the Wellington Enterprises building. Come alone." "Listen, girl, I don't get orders from Mr. Wellington." Carmen's voice interrupted him, and Richard realized that it was no longer the innocent voice of a child. It was cold, calculated, too mature for his age. "I have more photos, and I also have the letters my mother wrote for you all these years. Letters that have never been answered but show exactly what kind of man you have become." Richard felt the floor disappear under his feet. "What letters?" "Especially that 3 years ago, when my mother found that she worked for you. When she realized she was cleaning the office of the man who abandoned her pregnant." Carmen's pause was calculated, cruel. "She wrote about how she felt every night, running the cloth on her table, knowing that you were across the city sleeping in silk sheets." The line was changed. Richard held the phone hard enough to break it. How had that girl turned her guilt into a kind of psychological blackmail? And what other devastating revelations did she keep? "Oh, and Mr. Wellington?" Carmen continued, his voice now loaded with a coldness that made Richard shiver. "Bring your lawyer. You'll need him." All night, Richard could not sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, via Maria Elena, pregnant, alone, writing letters to a man who had chosen to ignore her completely. He imagined her cleaning her offices, maybe waiting for one day to find him in the corridors she rubbed every night. Worse yet, she imagined her finding out that she had been so close to her daughter's father for years, without him ever knew or care. The woman he had loved had become invisible in his own empire, a shadow that kept his world clean as he destroyed families like hers. The next morning, wearing a $5,000 suit, Richard Wellington III headed for a 12-year-old girl who had somehow impossible to shake the foundations of her emotional empire in less than 24 hours. As he walked through the park, a question echoed in his mind. How had an orphaned child developed psychological accuracy to attack exactly where it hurt the most? And what other surprises Carmen Rodriguez kept in her arsenal of devastating revelations? What Richard did not know was that this meeting would turn his silent guilt into something much more dangerous. A warm war between a billionaire used to always win and a girl who had spent her entire life preparing for this moment of reckoning. But mostly he had no idea that Carmen knew secrets about Wellington Enterprises that could destroy much more than just his guilty conscience. In the park in front of the Wellington Enterprises building, Richard arrived 15 minutes before the scheduled time, a strategy he always used at important meetings. But this time it was not he who controlled the situation. Carmen was already there, sitting on a bench with a brown paste on her lap. Beside him, a well-dressed 40-year-old Richard did not recognize. The girl seemed even more determined than the day before. "Punctual," said Carmen as Richard approached. "This is Dr. Miguel Santos, my lawyer." Richard almost laughed. "Your lawyer? Carmen, you are 12 years old. 13 next week," she corrected, opening the folder. "And Dr. Santos is not my personal lawyer. He represents the 127 families that have been dumped by the Wellington Enterprises projects in the last 5 years. Richard's blood froze. Dr. Santos extended a folder full of documents. Mr. Wellington, we have evidence of fraud in rental contracts, manipulation of real estate assessments, and bribery of municipal inspectors, all documented by the victims themselves. This is ridiculous. Richard tried to keep the composure. You have nothing to prove, Carmen interrupted him, removing a digital recorder from the folder. You have known Patricia Blackwood for 15 years, don't you? She squeezed the play. Patricia's voice clearly echoed. Richard, downtown inspectors are asking $50,000 to approve the project. It's the price of doing business with these people, you know how it is. My mother worked as a cleaning lady in her building 3 years ago, continued Carmen, her voice now loaded with calculated coldness. She wiped the meeting room every night. He knew where you kept the security recordings of all meetings. Richard felt his legs weakened. The meetings, all illegal decisions, all corrupt agreements, had all been recorded by the security system that he himself had installed to protect himself. Maria Elena copied her recordings for 3 years, said Dr. Santos, removing an external hard drive from the folder. More than 200 hours of evidence that systematically documenting their criminal practices. Why did she do that? Richard asked, genuinely perplexed. Carmen smiled, that same cold smile that had haunted Richard the night before. Because when my mother found out that she worked for the man who abandoned her pregnant, she decided that justice sometimes needs a little help. The flashbacks began to form in Richard's mind. Maria Elena working alone in the offices, listening to conversations through the walls, copying files while pretending to clean computers. His revenge had started the moment he found out to those who really worked. She spent 2 years documenting her crimes, continued Carmen. And when I learned I was dying, you taught me exactly how to use this information. Dr. Santos opened another envelope. We also have the letters Maria Elena wrote to you for 25 years. Letters that show your emotional deterioration as you found what kind of man you had become. Richard took one of the cards with trembling hands. Maria Elena's delicate calligraphy dated just 2 years ago. Richard, today I found that I cleaned my daughter's father's office. You have become exactly as your father, a man who destroys families for money. But different from him, you will pay for it. What do you want? Richard asked, his voice now reduced to a whisper. Carmen closed the folder slowly. We want justice. For my mother, for the 127 families, for all the people you hurt in the name of profit. And how do you intend to achieve this? Dr. Santos smiled. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. these recordings will be delivered to the federal prosecutor, the IRS, and all the great press vehicles of the city. EU, unless, Carmen got up, keeping the recorder in the school backpack, unless you voluntarily appear at the federal police station until 8 a.m. and confess all your crimes. It will be your only chance to control the narrative. Richard watched his daughter walking away alongside the lawyer, carrying enough evidence in school backpack to completely destroy her life. The girl he had underestimated as an orphan child seeking attention had proved to be a relentless strategist, armed with years of planning and thirst for justice. That night, alone in his $50 million mansion, Richard Wellington III realized that he had completely underestimated the power of a betrayed mother preparing his daughter for a war that he didn't even know he was fighting. What Richard couldn't understand was like a 12-year-old girl had orchestrated such a sophisticated plan with the accuracy of an experienced lawyer, and especially, what other Carmen surprises still kept to ensure that justice was done completely and irreversibly. At 7:45 a.m., Richard Wellington III was standing in front of the federal police station, his hands shaking slightly as he held a folder with his handwritten confession. But when she was about to climb the steps, her phone rang. Mr. Wellington? It was the voice of Margaret, his secretary, in total panic. The feds are here. They are apprehending all the company's archives, and there are journalists on the door. Richard closed his eyes. Carmen had played with him as a chess master moves his pieces. She never intended to give her a chance to deliver herself voluntarily, just wanted to see him suffer, anticipating the inevitable defeat. When he arrived at the Wellington Enterprises building, the scene was of complete chaos. Federal agents carried document boxes, while reporters bombed any employee who tried to leave. At the main entrance, a giant screen broadcast a press conference live. There was Dr. Miguel Santos, alongside Carmen Rodriguez, presenting the evidence to the world. For 3 years, Maria Elena Rodriguez systematically docked the crimes of Wellington Enterprises, he announced while displaying conversations prints between Richard and his partners. The press exploded in flashes when Dr. Santos reproduced one of the most devastating recordings, Richard's voice clearly saying, "These Latin families are disposable. We poured them today, we built tomorrow, and in 6 months, no one remembers that they existed. Carmen approached the microphone, his voice echoing with a maturity astonishingly calculated for a 12-year-old child. My mother wiped the offices of the man who abandoned me for 3 years. She heard him planning to destroy families just like ours, so she decided it was time to do justice. Richard watched everything from his car, parked across the street, watching his empire collapse live on television. Your phone kept playing. Investors, partners, lawyers, all desperate to understand what was going on. Patricia Blackwood called her hysterical voice. Richard, I need to defend myself. I'll say you forced me to participate in these schemes, but it was too late. Dr. Santos was displaying contracts signed by all members. Patricia recordings suggesting higher bribes, evidence of a 15-year conspiracy. Each test had been meticulously collected by a cleaning lady they didn't even notice that existed. Maria Elena Rodriguez worked as invisible for years, continued Carmen, looking straight at the camera. You treated her like mobile, as if she had no eyes to see or ears to listen. That was the biggest mistake of her lives. Richard got out of the car and started walking toward the building, but was instantly surrounded by reporters. Mr. Wellington, is it true that you abandoned a daughter in Mexico? How do you respond to corruption accusations? The questions flew like bullets, but Richard couldn't speak. 25 years of guilt, 3 years of secret surveillance, and 12 years of preparation of a girl had culminated in this moment of total destruction. On the screen, Carmen was holding the same yellowish photograph that she had shown to Richard 2 days earlier. This man promised my mother that he would return. Instead, he built a fortune destroying families like ours. Today, his promise was finally fulfilled. He came back to face the consequences. Richard looked up and saw Carmen in the second-floor window of the police station building, noting to be surrounded by the reporters. She didn't smile, did not wave, showed no emotion. He only watched the man who had abandoned her facing the justice that her mother had patiently prepared. Richard's $3 billion equity was being frozen in real time. Your members they were turning against him. His reputation was being wiped live on national television. And all this had been orchestrated by a 12-year-old girl who learned about justice in the last whispers of a dying mother. At that moment, Richard Wellington III understood that he had completely underestimated the power of a betrayed woman, teaching her daughter that some battles are fought with patience, intelligence, and the inevitable weight of truth. Carmen Rodriguez was not just his daughter. It was the materialization of perfect revenge that Maria Elena had sculpted with 3 years of irrefutable evidence. But there was still one last revelation that would transform Richard's public humiliation into something much deeper and more definitive. What Carmen had kept for the end would make the whole society understand that some injustices echo for generations, until someone has the courage to make justice prevail. 6 months later, Richard Wellington III was sitting on a bench on the same park where he had first found Carmen. But now, instead of a $5,000 suit, I wore simple clothes purchased at a department store. Hampton's mansion had been auctioned to pay federal fines. The luxury apartments, sold to indemnify the dump families. Wellington Enterprises had been dissolved, its assets distributed among the victims of their criminal schemes. Patricia Blackwood served a 5-year sentence for corruption. Dr. Santos had obtained an agreement where Richard would only take 2 years in house arrest, as long as he fully collaborated with federal investigations into real estate corruption. But the real punishment was not financial loss or public humiliation. It was waking up every day knowing that he had abandoned his own daughter, who had spent years working as a cleaning lady in the empire built at the expense of families like hers. Can I sit down? The familiar voice made Richard look up. Carmen was there, with a school backpack on his back, looking exactly like any 13-year-old girl returning from school. Of course, replied Richard, making room in the bank. They were silent for a few minutes, watching the children play in the park. Finally, Carmen said, "My mother told me not to hate you. I said hatred only hurts who feels." She was right, Richard muttered, her voice, laden voice with genuine remorse. "But she also taught me that justice and forgiveness are different things," he continued, Carmen, taking an envelope out of his backpack. "Justice is doing what is right. Forgiveness is a personal choice." Richard immediately recognized the delicate handwriting in the envelope. It was a letter from Maria Elena that he had never seen. "To be opened only if one day he shows true repentance," read Carmen on the outside. With trembling hands, Richard opened the letter. The words of Maria Elena, written shortly before she died, were simultaneously devastating and merciful. "Richard, if you are reading this, means that our daughter has managed to see you see the man who has become. I do not write to forgive you. That would be too easy. I write you a chance to forgive yourself if you can become the father that Carmen deserves. The tears ran freely through Richard's face as he continued reading. Maria Elena had left detailed instructions on how he could contribute to organizations that helped immigrant families, how he could use his business experience to build, instead of destroying. She taught me that the best revenge is not to destroy who hurt us, Carmen said, noting Richard finish reading. It is turning pain into something that helps other people. Richard folded the letter carefully. What do you want from me, Carmen? I want you to be the father my mother remembered Mexico, the man she loved before you choose the money. Carmen got up, adjusting the backpack. But this time you'll have to prove it deserves it. In the following months, Richard began working as a free consultant for eviction families, using his knowledge of real estate laws to protect instead of exploring. It was a job that did not pay in cash, but that slowly rebuilt something he had lost a long time ago, his humanity. Carmen was visiting him once a week, always in the same bank as the park. She told about the school, about the dreams she had for the future, how she was using the indemnity money to study law and to continue the work of justice her mother had begun. Do you know what was the hardest part of Mom's plan? Carmen asked in one of his visits. It was not to collect the evidence or coordinate with Dr. Santos. It was to teach me not to hate you, even knowing everything you had done. Richard looked at his daughter, a young woman who had orchestrated the fall of a billionaire empire 12 years old, but who chose to use this victory to build something better. Your mother created an extraordinary person. No, corrected Carmen, smiling for the first time since they met. She taught me that extraordinary people are made of extraordinary choices, and you can still make yours. The story of Richard Wellington III has become a national example of how justice sometimes needs a little help to prevail. Carmen Rodriguez has become a symbol that true strength does not come from revenge, but from the courage to turn injustice into positive change. Maria Elena Rodriguez had achieved something few can: teach her daughter that the best revenge against those who leave you is not destroying them, but giving them a second chance to become worthy of love that once rejected. And Richard, he has learned that some debts cannot be paid with money, only with a lifetime dedicated to repairing the evil that has been caused. If this story has touched your heart and made you reflect on second chances and true justice, subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how love can triumph even about the most painful betrayal. True wealth, Richard discovered, was not in the billions he had lost, but in the opportunity to meet the extraordinary daughter his mother had raised alone, turning abandonment into strength and pain in purpose.